Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we are tackling a household puzzle that has honestly driven countless homeowners absolutely crazy. We're going to solve the damp crawl space mystery. I mean, have you ever noticed that despite your absolute best efforts, certain spots down there just never seem to dry out? It doesn't matter what the weather is doing outside, it's a fascinating, but yeah, super frustrating problem. So, today we're unpacking the science behind why this happens, and more importantly, how we actually fix it. So picture this. You invest a ton of time, money, and energy into moisture control, right? You might even have this massive heavy-duty dehumidifier just humming away down under the house. And yet, you go down for a quick check and boom, that one corner in the back, still musty. Maybe you spot some condensation, or worst case scenario, the early stages of mold or wood rot. It is so deeply frustrating to pay for a solution and still find these hidden problem areas that, let's be real, eventually mess with your home's indoor air quality. So what's going on? Why isn't that dehumidifier doing the job for the whole space? Well, to really get it, we have to look at the actual environment down there. A crawl space is almost never just a wide open, empty box. Actually, it's way more like a complex obstacle course. Think of it like a giant maze. You've got unique layouts, nooks, crannies, plumbing, ductwork, structural piers, the whole shebang. And because of all these physical barriers, air naturally has a really hard time moving around. This creates what we call stagnant air. It's trapped. Since it can't just flow freely like air out in the open, it just sits there. And when air sits there, it literally locks moisture in place. If the air isn't moving, the moisture isn't moving. And this brilliantly illustrates the fundamental difference between the two environments you can have under your house. On one hand, you've got moving air. Moving air is absolutely critical for managing humidity, because when fresh, drier air circulates, it actively encourages evaporation off those damp surfaces. It lowers the overall moisture and balances things out. But on the flip side, we have stagnant air. When air is totally still, it traps that moisture and creates these isolated, high humidity zones. Without movement to push the dry air around, all that humidity just builds up and festers in those dead corners and low spots. Now, let's throw temperature into the mix, because this is where things get really interesting and honestly pretty damaging. In any crawl space, you've got cold surfaces, right? Like metal ductwork. When you combine those cold surfaces with that stagnant, humid air we were just talking about, you get condensation. See, without airflow to regulate the temperature, the air right next to that cold ductwork cools down super fast and just drops its water directly onto the surface. Those cold spots become absolute magnets for moisture. But if we can keep that air moving, the surrounding air stays at a much more even temperature, which prevents that condensation from even forming in the first place. Which brings us to a huge common limitation in standard setups. I like to call this the dehumidifier's blind spot. Look, a dehumidifier is a fantastic piece of equipment, no doubt. But at the end of the day, it's basically just a box sitting in one spot. It pulls air in, takes the moisture out, pushes dry air back out. But it completely struggles with dead spaces. If your crawl space is that giant maze of structural piers, well, the dehumidifier is really only drying the air right next to it. It just doesn't have the reach to pull that heavy, moist air out of a distant corner, all the way through an obstacle course. Now, what's really interesting about this is how simple the fix actually is. Listen to this quote from our source material. Instead of drying only the air closest to the unit, circulation fans spread the drier air evenly. That right there, that's the key. Your dehumidifier needs a wingman. Unless that newly dried air is actively pushed into motion and carried across the entire footprint of the crawl space, that expensive dehumidifier is just going to keep redrying the exact same little pocket of air while the corners stay completely damp and musty. So to actually solve this damped crawl space mystery once and for all, we have to look at moisture control as a complete strategy built on three main pillars. Step 1 is ventilation. That's bringing in fresh, dry outside air when the weather is actually playing nice. Step 2 is dehumidification, actively pulling moisture out of the air when the outside weather isn't helping. But step 3 is the missing link that so many folks overlook: circulation. Circulation is the delivery system. Without this third pillar, those first two are just never going to reach their full potential. And this is exactly where specialized equipment like ATMOX circulating fans comes in. These internal joist mount fans are basically the great equalizer for your crawl space. They are specifically designed to gently push air deep into those stubborn corners, carefully route it around those structural piers, and constantly prevent any stagnant air from settling down. They are that crucial delivery system I mentioned. So whether your dry air is coming from outside ventilation or from your dehumidifier, these fans physically carry it to the spots that natural airflow just can't reach.
Let's see how this builds when we start factoring in the changing seasons, because your system has got to be adaptable. When you've got favorable weather, ventilation brings in that wonderful, fresh outside air, and your circulation fans just spread it everywhere. Perfect. But what about when it's super hot and humid outside? Pulling that air in would be a total disaster, right? In those conditions, the ventilation shuts down and the dehumidifier picks on. Now, circulation relies entirely on the dehumidifier to maintain balance, ensuring that artificially dried air is pushed into every single nook and cranny to keep everything consistently dry.
When you set this up the right way, the benefits are just remarkable. First off, you get completely consistent humidity and temperature control across the whole area. No more cold spots, no more condensation magnets. But beyond that, you're actually putting way less strain on your primary equipment. Because the dry air is being spread around so evenly, your dehumidifier doesn't have to work nearly as hard or run as long. And you know what that means? Long-term energy savings. Circulation isn't just some optional extra step. It is a vital enhancement that makes the whole system run so much more efficiently.
Ultimately, what we're aiming for here is a beautifully balanced system. And a balanced system means the area right next to the dehumidifier isn't being completely over-dried while some hidden corner behind a foundation wall is being totally neglected. By using these ATMOX internal joist mount fans, you guarantee uniform conditions throughout that whole maze. That protects the actual physical structure of your home from things like wood rot and mold, and crucially, it drastically improves the air quality that eventually rises right up into your living room.
So, I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought today. Think about your own home for a second. Is your moisture control system actually reaching every single corner of your crawl space? Or do you have hidden stagnant zones just breeding trouble out of sight? If you've got a dehumidifier, but you're still smelling those musty odors, you might just be missing that vital third pillar of circulation. I highly encourage you to evaluate your setup. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.